Welcome in. We're excited that you joined us. We're going to be doing a new series on this channel called Theology, the Basics. And in that, every week, we're going to be walking through a different theological concept or idea and trying to understand that concept or idea, but also trying to understand that concept and idea in relation to the other concepts that we've talked about previously or the ones that we're going to talk about in the future. Oftentimes, this is referred to as systematic theology. But that's what we're going to be doing, just helping people understand the theological basics. My name is Todd from Holy Apostles. I'm the rector at this church in Satellite Beach. We would love for you to be subscribed to the channel. You can hit that subscribe button so you can get notifications of when we've posted new videos and things like that. Also, if you do hit that like button, it does help out the algorithm on YouTube tremendously. So if you like the content of what we're doing, feel free to hit that like button. It does help us out. So let me just be upfront, jump into this right away. I absolutely love the topic of theology. I think that it's engaging and thrilling and inspiring and all of those things. It just gets me excited talking about the God that we worship, talking about the world that we live in, and talking about human beings as a whole, because that's really what theology is. It's understanding the person and work of God, but it's also understanding the world that God created, which is part of the work that God has done. And because human beings are a part of that world, it's also trying to understand humanity as being a creation of God. Now, just because I love theology doesn't mean that I'm under the delusion that everybody loves theology. I know for a lot of people, the very mention of the word theology brings to mind either fear and just being completely overwhelmed, or on the other side, I am completely bored. And a lot of people think that theology is either boring or just over the top, way too difficult to comprehend. We're going to try and do this series in such a way that you can follow with us and see that theology is neither boring nor overwhelming. We're going to try to break it down into the basics of theology. And the first thing that I want to start with is, why study theology? Why is the study of theology important? And there's a couple reasons why I think theology is of great importance to us. I think the first thing that theology does is it provides us with an understanding of the God that we worship. And in addition to that, it gives us a language to be able to speak of that God. Because what we're trying to do, in all honesty, is we're trying to understand an infinite being with a finite mind and finite vocabulary. And because of that, we're always going to struggle and to some regard come up short. And what theology does is it helps provide us with a proper understanding of who God is and how God has worked, as well as giving us a proper language to be able to speak about who God is and what God has done. Because sometimes it's our thinking that fails us, but other times it's simply we don't have the words to be able to express what we want to communicate. And theology provides us with both of those things. And I think that that's really, really important. The second thing that I think, theology does is it gives us a consistent view of God. Because it's very easy to have two different views of God, and those two views of God being opposed to one another. And having a good theological foundation gives you a consistent view of God. I'll give you an example of this. So a lot of people have an understanding of God as a gracious being, and rightfully so. But on the other hand, when you see their real life being played out and you see them making mistakes or walking in some area of sin in their life, oftentimes that same person who has this view of this gracious, loving God is also in terror that God is going to smite them or abandon them, or that he hates them because of their sin. Do you see that the opposites that are taking place in their theology? They have a loving God that is gracious, but when they're in sin, when they're struggling, when they're wrestling with something, they can't see that loving, gracious God. The only thing they can see is a God that's going to smite them. You have two opposite ideas of God operating at the same time. And oftentimes a good theological framework will do away with that. It will give you a consistent view of God, a consistent understanding of the God that we worship, which I think is tremendously important. The third thing that I think theology does is it gives us a clear understanding of the world around us, which is also very important. Things are taking place in the world all the time. And how do we, as Christians, understand those things that are taking place? A good theological foundation will give us a proper understanding how to understand the things that are going on around us. Because theology is not just limited to God. It encapsulates the world that God created as well. And because God created this world, and this world has a certain order, and we believe that God is sovereign over the world, then when things take place in the world, we have a certain way to understand those things that are taking place, and theology gives that to you. The last thing that I think theology does is it also gives us an understanding of the things that are taking place within us. I don't know about you, but sometimes I do things and I don't quite understand why I'm doing them. I know that my faith is opposed to that. I know that I shouldn't be doing that, but I can't wrap my mind around why am I doing this if I hate this. And a really good theological foundation will begin to explain why we sometimes do the things that we hate, and why we sometimes don't do the things that we want to do. This is summarizing Paul when he said that I don't do the things that I want to do, but it's the very things that I hate are the things that I do. A theological foundation will help sort out those sorts of things as well. The last thing that I want to say on this topic before we round out this video and really move into this series next week, where we're going to be talking about Revelation and what is Revelation and how does Revelation work. The last thing that I want to say is there is a lot of creativity and space and variance within theology. There is a lot of place for thinking differently and thinking creatively about the God that we worship. There are also places where creativity is not necessarily welcome. Generally, those places where creativity are not welcome would be the places, the core doctrines of the church. So Jesus is God incarnate, come into the world, taken on flesh. Jesus died on a cross. Jesus physically rose from the dead. Those are the places where creative theology is not necessarily welcome, because those are Nicene Creed concepts. Those are the basics that are not negotiable. There are certain things that Christians just believe. But in a variety of other areas, there is a lot of creativity and space. And having a good theological foundation gives you a path to be able to walk on. And so you can have fun in the creativity and in the variance and in all of that, but also stay orthodox to the faith. And those two things, I think, are valued and important in Christian theology. Again, we're going to look at this much more. We're going to look at Revelation next week. But I'm excited to be with you. I'm excited to start this series with you. And once again, my name is Todd from Holy Apostles. And I am out of here.